Hello, everyone. We have a very special guest here and some pretty exciting news. We're growing the team at Cloud Imperium working on Star Citizen, and I'd like to introduce you to Tony Zurovec, who is someone that I've known for, a very long time.
24 years.
24 years. So we first worked together at Origin. Tony came in to work actually on Ultima 7, did all the AI, I believe, on Ultima 7, and then was the lead engineer on Ultima 8, and then went off to make Crusader No Remorse and then No Regret. And when I left Origin to start Digital Anvil, Tony came with me and was one of the founders. We worked together there until we sold the company to Microsoft. We've been talking since Star Citizen got off the ground, and I finally persuaded him to join up. He's going to be helping us make the game, but more specifically, he's going to be heading up the persistent universe part of the game, because the game has become so big that I can't actually direct every single aspect of it every single moment of the day. And Tony's very much like me. He's got programming and a design background and sort of overseeing games on all the aspects. So, both the creative aspect, the technical aspect, and the artistic aspect. This game, Star Citizen, is so big that we sort of need multiple people that have that sort of cross-discipline ability. So I was talking to Tony, who is a huge sort of, not everyone out there may know it from some of the past games, but he really likes he likes economics, simulation. One of the games he's wanted to do for a long time is sort of being a sort of strategy, sort of galactic economy game, which we could probably talk about later, but basically all the aspects that will be in Star Citizen's persistent universe. And also there was a game that we were developing at Digital Anvil, which is actually my biggest regret, that we never got it out the door, but it was called Loose Canon, and it was essentially everything that Grand Theft Auto 3 and above was, long before they were looking better than it was. It was a completely sort of open world game set in sort of the near future of the US, where law and order had broken down and people had their own armored cars and would essentially it was sort of like Privateer on wheels, I guess would be a good way of describing it. So all of that knowledge and experience and ability, I think, will help me and the rest of the team make Star Citizen as good as possible. So I wanted to introduce you to Tony, and I think we'll have a little discussion, and you guys can meet someone who I think is an incredibly talented person, and someone I'm really happy to have on board, making this crazy, ambitious, wild. Tony's still a little scared about just everything that has to get done in the game, but making the game of all our dreams. So there you go.
Yeah, I can't follow that. This guy can ad-lib for 10 minutes. I was always interested in computers and games. Probably started programming in 1979, 80. I would just beg, borrow, steal time from friends that had Apple IIs. I eventually got my own Sinclair ZX81. I managed to convince my dad to spring for the 16K expansion module, because back then 1K was
not really a lot.
It was just it was too limiting even back then. I eventually moved into higher and higher end computers, Atari 800, the Amiga, and the Amiga is actually an interesting one because that had a lot of repercussions in regards to how I viewed the development of Crusader, the technologies that I wanted to put into it, but we can get into that a little bit later. I'd actually been developing games, throughout like the mid 1980s to 1990, just always in my own spare time. Prototypes, never took any of them to completion, and finally around 1989 or so, I started working on one that I actually intended to finish, much more ambitious than anything that I'd done before, and it was very similar conceptually to an Ultima, which I'd always loved that series. I played the Ultimas, from Ultima 1, 2, 3, 4. I loved the open-ended nature, the big free-form simulation of a world to which it exposed the player, and then it gave you the ability to just set your own course throughout this environment. And I wanted something that mimicked that, but the Amiga had superior hardware, considerably superior hardware at that time to what was available on the PC. And so I was kind of going gangbusters with the implementation and then graphics. And it was just kind of fortuitous that a friend of mine knew that I was working on this. He had seen prototypes, and he happened to move next door to a guy that was dating Richard Garriott's sister. And so that just happened to result, in them having a conversation, him calling me. That was Kirk Winterode. And I got an interview at Origin. I went there to interview, and that's actually where we met. You probably don't remember it, but you were one of the very first guys that I interviewed with there. And we wound up, talking a bit about the Amiga's hardware and everything.
Right.
And you were asking me questions about, the blitter and what I was doing with some of the routines and everything. And so the rest is history.
I seem to recall remembering that you were like really good, and unfortunately you were going on Richard's team, not on my team.
I actually.
After many years, I managed to get him to come over to my side of the fence.
Yeah, no, it was interesting because I liked. It was interesting to see how the development of a game like an Ultima, which was like this game that I was I was basically trying to mimic it, and the way that I was going about solving a lot of the problems in terms of the tools and the processes that I was doing wound up being very similar, and my guess is that's probably what attracted them in regards to you'd slot right in.
No, I definitely think, and I also think that like it's always very. I mean, I would say even now, if someone comes in with like what they've done themselves in demo, it's like far more impressive than if someone says, "Oh, I got a degree in programming from somewhere." I mean, yes, it takes work to get a degree in programming, but it's if you actually show and say, "Here's my little game, and I'm running it all." Anyone in the game industry will tell you on the development side that that's one of the most impressive things. So, yeah, I think that was definitely a big plus on your side that you're like, hey, I've got this thing. And you're showing everyone's like, wow, that's pretty cool.
I learned a tremendous amount working on the Ultima games. It was actually the first time that I'd been placed into an environment where there were a ton of other creative and technical types that kind of matched up with my personality, that were interested in the same things, that were, pursuing it at the same, dedicated, 24-hour-a-day, type of, mentality level. I probably learned more in my first year or two at Origin than I had learned in the, in several years prior to that. It was when you're working on your own, it's just so much stopgap. It takes so much longer, and when you're in the presence, when you're in the vicinity of so many other people that are so bright and so dedicated, it dramatically increases the rate at which you can advance your own capabilities. Crusader came about via the convergence of a number of different things. I had always, I tend to view games in terms of their mechanics, their fundamental mechanics. And so all of these games that I played, throughout my childhood and teenage years, I was constantly looking at them thinking, man, if I had the skill set, if I had the capability, what would I do to make these better? And Crusader fundamentally was, I always viewed it as kind of a derivative of this game Castle Wolfenstein from 1981 by Muse Software. And the technology at the time could not do the idea justice. It was really, really, primitive what you could do with a game, in those days. But the brilliance, of the idea just always stuck in my head, and I always wondered what would happen if 10, 12, 15 years later, the farther I got from 1981, the more impressive the technology was, and therefore the farther I could actually push the basic concept. And so when I finally got my shot, when I finally had built up enough goodwill at Origin to where I was entrusted enough to do my own project, I wound up, pitching that game, got the green light, and we started. Crusader 2, I actually wrote in the clue book. It's kind of an interesting link to Star Citizen. There were several primary features that I wanted to see in any kind of sequel. One of them was, and this was all the rage in the mid-1990s, was cooperative and competitive multiplayer. The other thing was, I mentioned that I had specifically put the game 200 years into the future so that the concept of space exploration, travel to distant worlds, would be a realistic possibility. And so it wasn't lost on me when you were kind of talking about this whole Star Citizen thing. It's just kind of funny because everything you'd kind of hoped to do, maybe one day, your dreams, is like, it would just slot right into a little tiny corner, of the Star Citizen universe. To some degree, it just shows how bold the ambition is of this game, that you can take something that, once upon a time would have been, a state-of-the-art product, and it just becomes a little teeny tiny piece of the puzzle, for this all-encompassing, world simulator that's being built. my relationship with Chris started in 1990 when I went to interview at Origin, and we basically, had a conversation about what I was doing technologically within the game. I was actually surprised at the time, since y'all were doing all of, the development at Origin at that time was all PC related, that you were actually familiar enough with the Amiga's hardware to where.
Well, because in the UK, I actually started playing around on the ZX81, then I got a Commodore 64 and played with Amiga, and actually I only sort of started to do PC stuff once I got over to America, because that was what everyone was using. So I was actually much more familiar with sort of things like Amiga and sort of the graphical things you could do, because back in the old days the PC actually wasn't that very good. It only had originally it was CGA, it was CGA, which I think was 4 colors, and then there was like EGA, which was like 16 colors, and then VGA came out, which was 256 colors, and that's what we did Wing Commander in and Bad Blood.
That was actually another one, VGA 32200, that I mentioned a while back as being one of the design details that was affected by my history with the Amiga. So the Amiga in 1985 could do 640-200. I picked up an Amiga, a little bit after that, but for several years I was basically programming in this higher resolution, and then it was just a complete shock to go to Origin. Origin's just the premier developer, of the most elite titles in the PC industry. And here they are doing this VGA 32200. Yeah, these pixels were just absolutely gargantuan.
Wing 3, we made the move to, whatever it was at that time, was it a SVGA, which is 640, 480. 480. Woo! So yeah, it's quite nice to be now. We can run Star Citizen 4K.
Yeah, and so for 1990, 91, 92, 93, 94, I'm basically working in this resolution that was just absolutely driving me bonkers. And so when I got the chance to actually do my own game,
Crusader was one of the first SVGA.
One of the very first, and that was a huge risk, because at the time, the whole VISA standard was new, and we kind of had a drive, and we didn't know how well it would work, and I
remember there was a whole debate about should it be that, and you really wanted to do it, and there was quite a few other people at the company ooh, I don't know.
It was hugely controversial.
Will enough people even have the machines to run it?
It was hugely controversial for a number of reasons, and again, it just goes back to me. It's I was determined. It's nope. If I get to make my choice, I'm basically going to make the game that makes me happy, and hopefully there are a lot of other people that would feel the same way. But there were large costs associated with that move, and that's where a lot of it wasn't that other people were just arbitrarily saying, hey, why don't you go with low resolution? There were reasons. First and foremost, which was the fact that if you did VGA 32200, you could actually update the screen enough so that you could do smooth scrolling, which pretty much every game, for all practical purposes in the PC industry did. It was always, if you're going to have an action game, the screen moved right with your character. There was no way, given the bandwidth that was available over the bus, that we could do that with SVGA. And so I had to adopt this snapping camera system. In other words, you're going to have a character, and it's going to be an incredibly detailed, portrait into the world, and he's going to run, half a room, and then it's going to basically update the entire thing. And so we adopted this whole dirty rectangle system to deal with all of the stuff that had to change every frame, the explosions, the camera movements, the character animations, etc. But that was so out of the ordinary in terms of this concept of an action game just occasionally snapping the camera that a lot of people, couldn't get past it. And even though they're staring right, in the face of, well, do you want this incredibly beautiful, gorgeous, highly detailed game, or do you want to go back to these enormous, monstrously large pixels? And for me, the decision was always clear. It's I was going this way, and I couldn't look back. In 1996, it was already pretty much common knowledge that Chris was going to be leaving Origin, and that was creating all sorts of shockwaves because Chris had by far the most profitable group in the company. I had basically struck a deal with Origin and Electronic Arts in regards to obtaining royalties for Crusader, and that was promised for a long period of time. In the end, a year after the initial game in the series was delivered, I was finally told, no, all of that stuff that we've told you in the past isn't actually going to happen, and that it was basically the loss of trust that bothered me the most. And so as a result, I basically just resigned myself to finishing out the second iteration of the Crusader series, No Regret, that I was working on, and then I was going to leave the company. And so it was only natural to talk to, over the years, from when we first met in 1990, I came to know more and more about Chris. And so my respect over the years only increased. And so when he was going, I was definitely interested. At the time, they didn't have any kind of funding in place. And then he wound up striking a deal with Microsoft to provide the initial financing, wound up bringing AMD in as a partner later. We obtained the financing to start the whole thing up, and that started in 1997, first quarter 97. And Loose Canon was basically, it kind of goes back to how I look at a lot of games, which is, I played a game, Autoduel, that was developed by Origin. It was a computer adaptation of Steve Jackson's Autoduel paper games. And I loved the concept. It was, you could get into a car, you could outfit it with a variety of weapons, you could go through cities, enter shops, go out in the countryside, but the technology was so incredibly primitive that the game was largely overlooked. And it was another one to where I could look past all of that type of stuff and forgive it and actually have fun with the game because the concept was just so good. It was just a concept that was ahead of its time. And so just like with Crusaders, it always kind of stuck. It always resonated in terms of, well, what if you didn't have the technological limitations, what could you do with the basic idea? How could you extend it, make it your own, add all sorts of, additional, capabilities and flexibility into the game to make it that much more interesting. And that became the genesis for the idea behind Loose Canon. So near the end, when we originally did the deal with Microsoft, they were looking to basically find AAA games that were going to help show the rest of the game industry that moving to DirectX and therefore Windows was a viable proposition. At the time, if you think back to the mid-1990s, the majority of the games were still developed, exclusively for DOS. Near the end of our time with Microsoft, their focus, had changed a bit in regards to they had the Xbox coming out, and there was going to be this whole war, war within the living room.
And they wanted to focus on developing titles that they, at the time, were considered sort of console titles. I mean, if you actually look back on it, you think Freelancer and Loose Canon actually would actually be pretty good Xbox or console titles, but at the time they were sort of like considered like, well, they were more PC style titles.
Except that they pushed the envelope kind of like what you're doing now. It's like they pushed the envelope as far as you could on the PC, which means that it was never going to be a good fit. That was actually one of the things with the Crusader games. It's where I was adamantly against doing a Crusader port for the consoles. Origin still, basically the declaration was, well, if you're going to develop your own game series, you have to do ports to these other consoles. The reason why I hated it was because all of the stuff that I found, most attractive, the SVGA, the level of detail, in the world, it's like that all went away. You couldn't afford to do any of that on the limited, hardware of the consoles at that time.
Yeah, there wasn't a massive amount of memory, and there wasn't, modern day consoles have hard drives in them, but back then they didn't have a hard drive. They basically had a
they were trying to
CD-ROM.
shoehorn it. In the PC, we were relying upon 8 megabytes to fit all our animation frames. You had, I believe, 2 megabytes, on the consoles at that time. And so all of a sudden it becomes, well, we're going to flip every frame, and we're going to have the animations, and we're going to go to 32240 or whatever resolution they were doing instead of 640, 480. And to me, it's like that that low res VGA type.
That's why you're perfect on Star Citizen.
But it's an interesting one because it's very much like what you're doing right now with Star Citizen, in that you're not developing the game with all of these different platforms in mind. You're basically picking the platform that's got the absolute state-of-the-art hardware, and then you're making the best game that you possibly can. And if the consoles have hardware sufficient to do a good version of that game at some point in the future, then maybe it would make sense to actually port the thing over. But you don't work. The problem in my mind, and what burned me out in terms of the industry for a while, is that there's been such a shift over the last 12, 14, 15 years in regards to all of these developers that used to do PC, type of, high-end games. They've all shifted, or the vast majority of them have shifted, such that it's a given. You're going to be developing for the PC and for the Xbox and for the PlayStation, and whichever one of those systems has, the lowest common denominator in terms of specifications, that's going to be the one that ultimately determines the quality of the game. And to me, that's never been attractive. It's like I've never been a console type of player. I've always wanted to be able to push the envelope more with the later generation hardware you're going to find on the PC. I prefer the flexibility that you get with the interfaces. Just everything about the PC to me is more attractive. Certainly as as the initial version, as the initial target version for what you're going to do with a game.
Yeah, and so basically, when Microsoft bought Digital Anvil, they wanted to sort of focus on the Xbox games, so Brute Force that we're doing, and finish our Freelancer, and they wanted to focus down and not have as much development. So they let us take Loose Canon back, and we took Conquest Frontiers War back, and we actually did a deal with Ubisoft, which was a much smaller company at the time, for both the projects. But Loose Canon required a lot more development to finish than Conquest did, and you dealt with it for a while, but
I basically consulted, for a few weeks. Yeah. I became convinced that the way that they were going about it was never going to work, and so I basically bid adieu, and that was the end of it.
Yeah, which was sad because it would be good, and it's still like to this day. When I see Ed Freeze, he says his biggest regret was not finishing and getting. He did say that after. Grand Theft Auto 3 was a huge hit because Loose Canon basically did everything Grand Theft Auto 3 did at a higher fidelity, and you had a lot more options of stuff to do.
But it's a large problem within the industry, which is you can't get the funding to actually do the groundbreaking, innovative games until someone else has already done it. But no one else can get approval to do it because no one else has done it before them. And so in the case of Loose Canon, over and over and over, you're dealing with...
Well, we definitely dealt on Loose Canon. The problem was that, like, on Freelancer, people felt more confident because of the background of Privateer and Wing Commander, but on Loose Canon, they're like, well, there's no card game that's actually done that well. And you also get out and you're on foot and you shoot people and get in, and no one's done that yet. And so we're not sure this will sell any units. And so there's always this debate of, is it going to be a big hit, and whether, you should keep on investing money into it. And so that was kind of why it was on. It was sort of, it became more of an edge case. It's sad.
It was compared over and over in terms of sales projections to I-76, to Midtown Madness, to Carmageddon.
Which didn't even sell 100,000 units.
Yes, and that's exactly it. And so then they go, well, wait, why are you going to be able to do so many more? It's like, because it's a totally different game, but it's just like this one. This one's got cars, and it's, so what's different from you? And it's like, it was...
So that's why we're crowdfunding now.
Yes, and that's actually one of the most attractive things, which is... For me, I kind of swore after that, I'm never again going to put myself at the mercy of a publisher that on a whim can basically, due to their fickle taste, change their mind. An idea that they thought, merited, going through with at one point in time, to have their priorities change over the years, and then to have them, decide, no, I don't really want to do it. It's one thing to write off the money, but you write off years of your life that you spend focused on these games. And that bothered me. I never wanted to do that again. And so one of the things that's so appealing about Star Citizen is you don't have that publisher that's putting you in this, state.
And everyone out there can see the game as you're making it. So you're not going to do all this really hard work, and no one gets to appreciate it.
You got, as of right now, almost 500,000 people, and basically they're the people, voting yes, no, we like this feature, etc. And I suspect that in the long run, those people are going to have a much more steady state of mind in regards to the development than any sort of executive, at a typical game publisher would have. Lots of stuff, lots of consulting work, lots of downloadable games, during the early 2000s and stuff. I did a lot of financial analysis, trading software, etc. I also, happen to have a lot of interest in economic theory and business-related stuff. I never thought that there would actually be a game that would allow me to put some of those principles to work. But again, it's just kind of fate, I guess, in regards to Chris coming and saying, hey, we've got this incredibly detailed economic system that we want to drive context for the entire Star Citizen universe, and that's going to be, part of your purview. And it's just one of those things to where I see that and it's like, oh, that actually sounds really, really awesome. If you'd have asked me a year ago if I was ever going to return to game development or even working in an office, I'd have said that you were completely crazy. There was absolutely no chance. It was never going to happen. But as I got to know more and more about Star Citizen from talking with Chris, I'd been looking for something to challenge me for a while, something that would really push me, because that's one of the most appealing aspects, I think, of like doing, these big detail games is you get people that are going to appreciate all of the hard work that you're putting in, and that drives you, it pushes you to do, to work harder, to go farther than you otherwise would. And so when Chris started talking to me about Star Citizen and I started to come to know more and more about the project, I started to get, more and more, interested in terms of the possibilities. I lost my train of thought there.
Oh, you're fine. The other thing on you coming back to doing it, I think that, from my perspective, I need more people that are helping me sort of guide and direct the project that understand like multiple aspects of it. So, we're such a big game now. We're developing in so many different locations. So we're out here in Santa Monica, we're in Austin, Texas, we're in the UK in Manchester, and then we've got contractors working in Montreal and working in Colorado and down in Monterrey, Mexico, and a few other places. I can't be everywhere at once, and so last year when we were much smaller, I was spending a lot of time in Austin, and I don't spend as much time in Austin now because there's a much bigger group here in Santa Monica, and so having you be part of it, I just sort of feel like it will help make the game better, because every day there's going to be someone that can make the call between, design-wise and technology-wise or art-wise, because a lot of the calls you make when you make games, you have to consider all three aspects, and so unless you have people that have experience making calls at that level, it becomes hard, because the lead programmer doesn't necessarily have the ability to make the calls on a sort of more global basis. And so very good to have Tony aboard now, because we've got a pretty big, ambitious game, and lots of stuff still to do.
A lot of stuff. The things that I most like to see in a game would probably involve an open-ended universe. I like a large environment to explore, and this goes all the way back. That is in essence what Loose Canon was going to be: big, open-ended.
And I think that was kind of why you liked Ultimas, right?
That's
you told me that when
yes.
when you're first there and you work on Ultima, and everyone says, "What do you work on?" and you said, well, I'll do AI, and you're you thought everyone was going to fight for AI because that was the most interesting thing.
Yeah, we're all four of the all four of the programmers for U7 are sitting in a room, and we're basically breaking up all of the initial tasks to be done, and we get to the part to where I think everybody's just going to be literally just coming to blows over who's going to get to do this stuff, and I'm just grabbing things right and left. It's like, oh, who's going to do AI? Yeah, I'll take that. Who's going to do combat? Oh yeah, I want that. And just down the list, all the other programmers are like, yeah, that's fine, let him have it. And so I just wound up grabbing a huge chunk of games, despite the fact that that was my first professional title, ever.
Oh, you did well enough. You became the lead on the next game, Ultima 8. So.
But some of that is motivation, right? It's like if you're incredibly motivated, if you find something extremely attractive, then you tend to get good at it because you obsess. You work so hard at it, and that's what a lot of game development is, which is it's hard work, it's dedication. You certainly need the intelligence, but it's the attention to detail across a range of disciplines that allows you to make a good, well-balanced game, and balance winds up being another one of those incredibly important details. I also tend to like consequences, in these games. I like games that allow you to progress at your own pace and take your own route, through the world. But the game should respond appropriately when you do things you shouldn't be doing. In the case of Loose Canon, or even Star Citizen for that matter, it's like you can break the law, you can do things, but there will be a system in place that's actually going to punish you, or that's going to make your life a lot more difficult. And then it's up to you to decide, how much of that you want to endure, and whether that's the type of stuff that you really want to engage in. On Star Citizen, I'm going to be directing the Persistent Universe group, which is headquartered in Austin. That's going to involve a number of responsibilities, including the economic system that's basically going to drive, the context for the entire game, the mission creation system and content. It's going to involve all of the planet-side construction, a lot of the interface stuff that you're going to encounter, down on the planet side. The thing, it's actually not any one specific thing that I'm most excited to add to Star Citizen. It's more the breadth of stuff that I would like to add. It's like I want diversity, variety. I want so much content out there that players can effectively choose any of a range of different occupations that they want to pursue, and know that there's going to be so much content within the game that they can do that for an extended period of time and encounter so much of interest that they're going to stay that they're going to continue to have fun for a long time, regardless of whether they're pirate or mercenary or bounty hunter or freighter or any of a million different things. Well, maybe not a million, but
I'm sure
a dozen or two.
I'm sure there'll be all kinds of different. Like I was always surprised when you sort of read the forums and you see what people are interested in. You've got people that they just want to salvage. They're like, you guys have a space battle, I'll show up and I'll get all the debris and take it and make a profit for it. And then you got other people who go, I want to be rescue and recovery when someone breaks down, and someone wants to be a flying ambulance. There's all these things that you get in the real world that you would normally you sort of just think, okay, well, people want to be a pirate or a glory hunty bounty hunter or something, but there's a whole bunch of people that actually kind of have a lot of fun playing a lot of different roles. And I think also there's a lot of people that like the idea of sort of role playing, like a whole setup, right? So it's not just like an organization and they have people that perform different roles in the organization and go together. And I think that's actually going to be one of the coolest things, is to sort of watch when we get all the pieces there, allowing the players to do it, just to see what happens. It's already, we've just released the Arena Commander, and it's super early. We've got one game mode instead of the 5 game modes we're going to have, and we still got a lot of finessing to do on the flight model. Not so much the physics of the flight model, because that's super accurate, but how the IFCS interprets your commands and different things we can do to make it easier or give you more options to maneuver. But it's just cool watching all these different play and how what they do, or the different styles, and what ships they gravitate to. So I can't imagine what it's like when the whole universe is going to be
it's going to be completely insane, and it's going to be difficult, but it's also a really interesting challenge to try to solve, because you've got so many different play mechanics coming into contact with one another, and that kind of goes back to that balance thing. It's like striking the right balance so that you don't have people pursuing one line of work and they've got dramatically better potential to obtain better equipment, weapons, loadouts than other people. It's like you need to give enough possibilities so that regardless of what you're doing, if you're really, really good at it, you can actually still become really successful within the game. What you don't want is dead-end occupations to where you pursue this and there's just no hope that you're ever going to be able to get any of the other cool stuff, because effectively it's going to turn off a lot of players, and that part of the game winds up effectively becoming abandoned. There are actually not that many games that really interest me nowadays, and I think to some degree that's because of the whole lowest common denominator aspect that I talked about before. I still like some of my favorite games are actually a bit older. I love the Desert Combat modification for Battlefield 1942. I still occasionally play that. StarCraft 2. I still play on occasion.
We used to have a lot of Command and Conquer and StarCraft sessions.
Oh yeah.
at Digital Anvil.
Yeah, I absolutely love real-time strategy games, but the problem, as I see it, is that, just to pick that genre as an example, is it's just become iterative to where, the maps get larger, the number of units, get larger, but there's no fundamental innovations that are actually happening in there. And so I tend to get bored relatively easily, and that's part of, again, what attracts me to Star Citizen, and that kind of motivates me in regards to providing this huge amount of diversity. Is if I play a game like a Desert Combat, then I jump in and I'm sniper for a while until I get bored, and then I flip and I'm flying Apaches, and then I'm driving an Abrams tank, and I like the capability to bounce back and forth according to however I'm feeling at that moment. And Star Citizen does that, but cranks the dial, up to 11.
So how are you two going to work together across multiple time zones with this enormous project?
We're fairly, like, when we talk about approaches to how we go about making a game, like the way we like iteration, we like to put results on the screen, and sort of the approaches, both Tony, it's one of the reasons why I was trying to get Tony in, is that we're kind of on the same page, so I sort of have a lot of trust in Tony. But essentially what's happening is we sort of, on a high level, discuss the design goals, and there's already a lot of that done, and there's also actually a lot of the foundational work done for the persistent universe, and because we've been working on it for 18 months now on the whole different parts, but it all has to sort of come together into a cohesive whole. And so that's kind of where I feel like it's sort of a full-time job just to do that, but also it's a full-time job to be sort of going out, overseeing like the space combat, and it's a full-time job to be overseeing the first-person shooter side of it, full-time job to be overseeing the like big cap ship combat side. So that was kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to bring Tony in, because I sort of felt like he would be he would be a sort of great, I wouldn't want to say proxy, but like in Austin, it's like people, like the team there, which is a pretty big and talented team, and of course Behavior sort of also is doing most of the persistent universe roles. So there's of our large amount of contracts on, I think it's close to 100 people that will be working on just sort of the planet side and the aspects related to the economy and the mission generation and all that. They really need like love and attention every single day on a sort of global basis, and so that's what Tony's going to do. In the meantime, me and Tony, whether it's like Tony's out here in Santa Monica right now, or I go out to Austin, and then we talk a lot, but it's quite easy for us to sort of, we can go, okay, we talk about this, and Tony's like, well, I want to do this, da da da, and I'm like, yeah, that sounds really cool, and how about tweak that, and we sort of stay on sync on a high level. And of course, the high level creative people across all the project, not just Tony and I, but in the other, like in Erin and over in the UK, and our partners working on the first person shooter, and like I said, Behavior up in Montreal, we all sort of sync up on regular basis. But I think it's the only viable way. When a projects grow really big, you sort of have to at some point, you can't do everything yourself, so you've got to make sure that you've got really great sort of key, lieutenants, or however you want to name it, to share the vision, and captains. Sorry, I'll give you a colonel. I'll give you a colonel fresh over that. To get the game done. So that's kind of the way it's working. So we've been doing a lot of kind of whatever you want to call it, mind melding, downloading.
Yeah, that's the whole reason why I'm out in LA this entire week, is basically to get the design directives from Chris so that I can effectively go off and try to execute those plans. There's inevitably going to be a lot of filling in, of the details, and in the end, Chris verifies everything. And if we wind up, getting off track a bit, then he basically pushes us back on.
I'm hoping we won't get off track. No. So anyway, hopefully everyone out there found this little discussion useful. I'm really excited to have Tony be part of the team. He's a great example of how we're wanting to sort of collect world-class talent to make this game as good as possible. And as ever, thank to everyone out there for enabling us to be at the point where we can bring Tony and all the other really great people in that we have. And we're just trying to make the best game possible, because we basically want to fly around and play it ourselves. And we'd love to do it with all you out there. So thank you all. Do you want to say thank you, Tony, today?
Thanks, guys.